biggest impact on technology was the Inflation Reduction Act. We're in an environment where a lot of change is happening in a short period of time. How you exit roles, jobs, positions, and so on is really just as important as how, if not more important, than how you enter them.
I know Jesse from Stanford. He did a bachelor's there in my class and master's, and we just saw each other in October at the 20-year reunion, and he had just kind of like a really positive, energetic spirit at the party, and I thought it would be great to include him on the podcast, and I thought it'd be fun, also opportunity to catch up more. There are all kinds of people there. There was Gary Tan from Y Combinator, and like U.S. congressman from our class, and also old friends. So I thought this would be a good chance for us to learn more about how his journey has progressed, like last 20 years since school, and also learn from your wisdom in entrepreneurship and investing. Daniel just raised a fund for his startup, and I know Jesse works in private equity and investment stuff. Curious to learn your take on that. Jesse, could you kind of rewind to June 2003 or 04 graduation day, and like what you were kind of thinking, where you would go from there, and how it played out?
Sure. So I think, like Steve Jobs said at the commencement speech at Stanford a couple of years later, looking forward is very difficult to foresee how your life will play itself out. Looking backwards, provided that you made certain decisions, staying true to like certain core beliefs and values, priorities in your life, the dots seem to connect and in the long run make sense. So at the outset of graduating from college in 04, because I did a master's as well, I took on a job. So I was an employee instead of an entrepreneur at a company that I assumed would provide me with the broadest possible skill set and marketability across many different industries. And that industry was management consulting. The company was A.T. Kearney, which has now been rebranded as just Kearney. Kearney being a competitor to some of the top management consultancies out there. And that company did fulfill in what I expected it to provide me in terms of skill set and exposure to a variety of industries. Then it was really up to me to, I think, focus on which skill set I wanted to develop on further and which industry I wanted to end up in. Now, with that said, I have worked across a few industries, and that has certain, pluses and minuses. I mean, there's something to be said about focusing on one industry that you're very passionate about, and then trying to build, long-term roots in that space, and potentially identifying a very senior leadership role within, a large organization, a large company in that industry, or doing something on your own.
So the going straight into the management consulting, you were able to get kind of a broader set of like business skills, and I imagine you traveled a lot. And what were some of your kind of key insights that you took from that time?
I think the biggest insight I had is that Fortune 500 size companies are so large that they become bureaucratic. So organizational theory, which is somewhat related to, what I studied in my master's, becomes quite important, because implementing what I call DNA level change at a Fortune 500 size company is very difficult for any CEO to embark on, even with the support of the board. There will be dissenters within the organization. There will be dissenters outside of the organization. So making very bold steps for a huge company with like 100,000 plus employees is very challenging. Therefore, what ends up happening in in the American corporate world is a lot of the innovation, a lot of job creation, a lot of the new ideas are developed at small to medium sized businesses. Those businesses then naturally end up being consumed by the larger Fortune 500 size companies, um, which then creates a new impetus for innovation, new product, new service generation, new ideas, and so on, both thinking within those divisions of the Fortune 500 companies until those acquirees end up becoming large and bureaucratic themselves, and the process repeats itself. So I don't think I'm saying anything new to your audience. I'm just pointing out that in the capacity of it is of serving as a consultant for Fortune 500 size companies, that was one of the key observations that I made.
Was it maybe a source of frustration where you would see ways the organization could improve, and then see the inertia factor that perhaps made you feel frustrated about them not moving as quickly as?
I think, as with most things in life, there are positives and negatives depending on how you look at it. So the negative is absolutely there's a certain level of frustration, but that itself breeds a need for external consultants to come in and do the politically, let's say, difficult moves that leadership cannot. So there's that element. And then also from an entrepreneurial sense, you identify these pain points that big companies are failing to address. And you, along with a lot, some research and careful insight, can potentially build a solution there that turns itself into a very successful business model.
Could you talk about the journey that led to you getting into private equity and investments and operator in technology companies?
Sure. I think when I was at Stanford, there was a recognition that private equity is in some ways the highest echelon in the finance career path. And I actually started in investment banking when I was in college. So I did a few internships with Solomon Brothers, which was then became Citigroup. And so I had some early exposure to what private equity was during those years at Stanford. Prior to coming to Stanford, I had no idea what it was. I had zero exposure to that world. I think that recognition of the value of that career set globally is something that stayed with me, and is something that I eventually wanted to get into. So I was able to take an indirect path into the industry by way of working both in entrepreneurship, for some smaller size companies specifically within healthcare technologies, and then also working as an investor for 2 family offices. So I think the combination of already having some investment experience, albeit for a family office group, and the skill sets that I developed as an entrepreneur, it made me more marketable in a private equity sense, because now I had certain, let's say, insights, experiences, professional network being perhaps the most important ingredient in all this, that made me more valuable from a private equity perspective, since we were doing private equity for middle market companies. So essentially sub $100 million in enterprise value. And so that's the path that I took into private equity. I spent about 5 years at the Roca Partners, which was a spinoff from Ares Management, the private equity group, the private equity practice. Sorry, it's an industry where I won't see myself returning to in the near future, and where I would like to continue building my career.
What inspired you to focus on the lower middle market, and also how do you identify promising areas or opportunities in that area?
So I think there is a practicality there. So as a first-time fund manager being someone who is essentially running an investment fund independently for the first time, it's very unlikely that you're going to be managing hundreds of millions of dollars of assets. So most likely you're going to be raising capital on a deal by deal basis, or you're going to have access to a dedicated fund of, call it, sub $200 million, certainly sub 500 million. But that was the case for us. We were essentially raising capital on a deal by deal basis until we had enough funds to be able to have a dedicated fund, which became Fund One. And previous deals were rolled up into Fund One. In that case, given the limited check size of equity, unlevered equity that we could write per deal, it forced us to focus exclusively on small to medium businesses. Would we love to do huge check sizes? Yes, but we couldn't raise the sufficient capital to complete those types of transactions. So we were really focused on just smaller check sizes, smaller enterprise value.
Daniel, I know, has some experience with investors and raising capital. I haven't actually worked with investors really. I've just been friends with them. Remember Amit Garg? He was on our podcast actually not long ago, and he has his own capital company, Tau Ventures. But Daniel, what's been your experience with yours?
I think there's different types of investors. There's angel investors, which are just individuals. There's seed investors who are like kind of institutional-ish, but like kind of they do really high risk startups. And then there's venture capital, which is more formal, but it's still really high risk. And then there's, the PE, which sounds like that's where Jesse, your expertise is takes companies and kind of optimizes them for like cash flow and like just making it like a really good business overall. Most of them are generally designed to be sold, I think. I mean, I could be wrong, Jesse, like at some point, but is that where you say your sweet spot is, Jesse? Like just the PE side primarily?
Correct.
Or okay.
Yeah. That's absolutely it. So I think the expertise that I have is in really identifying businesses that are underperforming, that have potential beyond what the leadership team has unlocked, where I, along with other investors, can come in and unlock that value in a variety of ways. Perhaps that's strategic partnerships, perhaps this change of leadership. So, there's a variety of paths to get there, but the end goal is really the same, which is to radically deliver outsized returns on equity for our investors and for the general partner, i.e. the investors in that opportunity, the company.
Would you say PE is lower risk than venture in the sense that like you're kind of taking a company that has cash flow and has like, I don't know, a lot of customers? Like venture, they're kind of like hitting for the fences in a sense. So like you see a lot of venture firms kind of come and go. I hear that there's like I hear that there's a high turnover rate. I don't have any data on that, but meaning like a venture firm will start 7 years later, it might just like break up because they didn't have any like mega home runs. Is PE safer in that sense? So if like someone was to invest in PE, the cash flow is there. There's the existing company.
Sure. So I think I think you're getting to the answer there. On a risk reward basis, PE I think would be lower on the risk premium scale and still deliver very attractive returns. Typically, these returns are 20+% IRR. Now, over the last 2 decades, I would argue that venture has been made possible primarily because of a low interest rate environment. And obviously, all the innovation and excitement that was unlocked in Web 2.0 through, enabled through smartphone and everything that all the technologies that unlocked for the world. So the combination of a surge in productivity as a result of adoption of new technology globally across almost 8 billion people, let's say, a low interest rate environment for, let's say 15 plus years, then created the environment for venture to really take off, because venture investors could make long-term high-risk bets with a low cost of capital that had very attractive potential globally for technologies that could scale at low cost. So I think that's the environment that we were in 15 years ago. I think the environment that we find ourselves going into for the next 15 years will be very different.
So venture is really long term. If there's a low interest rate, people could raise and go into that for like a long period and not have to worry about like high interest rates, like eating into their returns, is what you're saying.
It's both high interest rates eating into their returns. That's one aspect. I would argue that it's the risk is actually front loaded in the sense that in a higher interest rate environment where your risk free rate is, call it, 4.5%, 5%, it's very difficult to raise new capital for an investment that is pre-revenue, right? Where there is no convincing pathway to profitability. And a lot of things have to go right for that business model to deliver the returns that are being expected.
I think most of the world operates that way. Would you say, because you went to Stanford, do you feel that pressure there in that like pre-revenue company? Is it different in the world? Guess what I'm getting at, like from Stanford to New York to wherever you're seeing companies, do you see companies struggle more outside of Silicon Valley, less, or it's the same everywhere?
So I think companies struggle more in environments where you don't have the core ingredients necessary to sustain entrepreneurship, to sustain a healthy ecosystem for employees, for employers, and for industries. So centrally planned economies, i.e. communist societies, don't offer the right set of ingredients for entrepreneurship to thrive. Now, I'm not saying that China is is not a great place for entrepreneurs. Clearly, some would argue it's the best destination for entrepreneurs that want to access huge markets. I would disagree with them. I think you need some core ingredients, and what the United States does well is markets are relatively independent of government influence. You have great academic institutions that essentially foster a revolving door of both thought leaders and graduates. You have huge capital markets that and the right tax incentives to motivate investors to take risks, and you have a huge domestic market. So these are just the obvious ingredients that everyone can point to and say, well, yeah, if you got all that, and the Silicon Valley has that in spades, right? It's located in the state with the greatest population. It's got great educational institutions, a hugely talented workforce, a history of entrepreneurship, which I think is the key missing ingredient in any of these other markets, whether that's in Germany or India, Japan, South Korea, anywhere else. You have a history of successful exits, entrepreneurs reinvesting. You have also a fundamental philosophy, really, of people that historically are the opposites of show-offs, right? They lead really simple, lifestyles. So, and I think that's respected because essentially people don't necessarily need to spend that excess capital on consumer goods. They are very willing to reinvest that back into other entrepreneurs. And I think that tradition goes back generations, since essentially the communities in California were founded since the mid 1800s. So I think those are the ingredients that have made Silicon Valley hugely successful. Can Silicon Valley retain that advantage? I think we have to go back to what Steve Jobs said when I started this podcast, which was, Steve Jobs said, what was it, in the class of 06, 07? He said, well, my advice is stay hungry, stay foolish, right? I think those are the words of a true Silicon Valley, leader. Silicon Valley people are relatively foolish, but they remain very hungry, hungry to keep learning, to keep innovating. And I think those are the skills that, make an entrepreneurial ecosystem successful. And that is, I think, what can keep Silicon Valley, ahead of the curve.
As a mentor with Endeavor and entrepreneur in residence at Kauffman Foundation, what advice do you give emerging entrepreneurs?
So those are experiences that I had for a short period of time. It's not something that I'm actively doing at the moment, but it is something that I participated with in a few years ago. So I think, listen, to the extent that my opinion, and I've gone through the entrepreneurship cycle a few times, so I know the pain points very well. So to the extent that my opinion here matters, I would say that, the more you research the pain points that you're trying to solve for, all the buyers and the process, all the buyers along the way to get your products and goods, products and services to market, the more you understand how the end user experiences the product or service, the more likely you are to succeed. Success is never guaranteed out there, but the more you can control for those risks, the more likely you are to succeed. Entrepreneurs that approach service product formation, building companies without solving for those very granular and difficult items to solve for are more likely to fail.
And how did you apply some of those strategies as CEO of eTherapy?
At eTherapy, what we did was we tried to understand what therapists were doing and how they service patients. And then we tried to understand if this could be done online, given certain technologies that were available to us, call it between 2012 and 2015. So I'd say that company, which was founded by two other Stanford grads, I was not founder. I was brought in kind of later to kind of turn around the project a bit. That company was, I think, a couple of years ahead of its time. Had they, been in a position to scale up during the COVID years, it would have really, hit it out of the park. But unfortunately, they went to market, before the video technology was seamless, at a time where it was still not clear what the state regulations were around access to mental behavioral health through video and the reimbursability of that. And at a time when the ability to deliver that on a mobile phone was still kind of limited. I think if we could do it all over again, we would have focused on one specific community of users that needed to use a service that had high likelihood of having the service covered by a health insurer or some other huge institution. And the technology did not necessarily have to be mobile first. And I think in retrospect, those communities would have been something like veterans and people that members of the Federal Veterans Affairs office. So that would have been a community that I think could have greatly benefited from our technology had we focused on them and their needs first.
It sounds like you saw some signals that, hey, this is a useful product and I think there's a real chance for the business, but the timing wasn't quite right as far as like the rest of society supporting it on like a pay insurance payback system or the mobile access.
Yeah, I think the timing of that one, it would have been huge if it was started a little before COVID and COVID hit.
Sure.
And I feel like you would have really hit your stride with that startup. I guess going back to your PE, going back to like raising and venture capital and that sort of thing. Another question I have for you about it is, the way that PE operates, as far as I know, is like you take some money, you buy the business, but you also take a loan from some other provider that you both take on the risk together, your time, their money, and you're paying and servicing back some of that loan. Because venture capital is going through a hard time with that, I wonder and I'm not in PE at all, if there's struggles just in a broad market where like the loan providers are very hesitant or they're giving abnormally high interest rates to the PE firms. Like, is that something that you're seeing out there as like a broad market, or is that like not affecting VC dollars? It might be affecting it greatly, but for the PE firms, is it less dramatic in that sense?
No, I think it is a pain point that principal investors like private equity investors are seeing. And I think what's interesting is that it eats into their competitiveness. So if structured debt providers can, provide the same cost of capital to companies, and perhaps some of the expertise or assistance that they need in optimizing their cash flows and so on, then they are in a unique position to be able to offer the capital without a lot of the additional costs and structure that private equity investors would need to see in the transactions that they're funding. How the cost of capital has a huge impact on the development of certain, financial structures and business models. So when interest rates were low for an extended period of time, private equity could flourish, venture could flourish. But in an environment where the cost of capital is much higher and there's no end in sight to that cost of capital, perhaps in the short term, we have indications that cost of capital will be lower in 24 than it's been in the last 18 months. But I would argue that, the moment that inflation ramps up in a meaningful way again, which I think is essentially one geopolitical crisis away, we will find ourselves in a significantly higher interest rate environment than we've been in for most of 23.
Where's your focus now? Is it mostly the Potro capital, what's kind of at the top of your list right now of your focus?
So my focus actually is working more independently before I go out and try to raise another fund or work with other folks to do so. I think the reality here is that to work in a private equity capacity, you need to have significant personal financial resources that you're going to pledge across all of these transactions that you're going to theoretically be doing every year. That's a lot of money. And so in order to have those resources available, you need to build up some, significant cash reserves. So, I'm in a position like many other folks that are kind of early in their private equity career, independently, where you want to build up those reserves in order to then, be able to credibly co-invest along with your investors on these transactions. I'm working independently now, more specifically in the transportation sectors where I've been in for the last couple of years. And so that's something that I'm kind of more focused on in terms of developing of an expertise and positioning myself to be able to do some transactions in this space.
Like Tesla and Waymo, the self-driving cars, electric vehicles.
Yeah, but maybe like the very, very JV version of those big players.
If you're in that space of automotive, that's a very actually capital intensive industry, right? Like it's not just a raise $2 million. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. I don't really know that industry at all.
To clarify, I am not in automotive. What I am is in group travel. So essentially bus travel, primarily bus and on a global scale. So that's something that I am, been more focused on the last couple of years and where I desire to continue building that expertise.
By group travel, you mean, okay, so it's buses, that sort of thing. What do you mean by that? Is it like technology that's involved, like routing of buses, or is it like the actual self-driving buses, or is it more like the gas versus electric? Like what part?
So it's a combination of all of those things. So my thesis is that, whereas the air travel industry has had quite a bit of evolution in the last 15 years, from the consumer experience, from the technologies involved in crafting better, safer airplanes, the bus industry globally has not. And so there's a great deal of catch up, both in technologies for route optimization, the onboard experience on a bus, intercity versus charter, public versus private buses, and so on. So on all those fronts, driverless, electric, all that stuff. So on all those fronts, there is a lot of upside there. That's the field that I'm playing in at the moment.
I mean, that's an interesting space now that you're talking about. I think it's kind of ignored. You're right. There's a lot of hype going in general automotive, I have seen a lot of startups. Like there's a company that's trying to build like an electric Concorde plane. There's a lot of these like really heavy investment companies coming up. But the bus industry, I haven't really heard of too many startups. So it's kind of an ignored space.
Yeah.
What made you get into that? Like it's such a interesting space. Like were you just like researching the space or?
Essentially, what got me into it was COVID. So COVID created a crisis for all these companies. There was no groups and there was no travel. So there was certainly no group travel. So companies in this space were just getting annihilated. And it initially, I think the thought was that COVID could go on for years. It was like 2-3 years was the expectation. And that's enough to destroy a business. So I had a very contrarian view, and I thought that we would come out of COVID as fast as we got into it. And that was the case outside of the U.S. But U.S. was like, a little bit harder depending on where you lived in the U.S. And, California was probably one of the states with the strictest COVID, guidelines. But anyhow, that crisis for me was very motivating and was what got me interested in the space because if you could, buy low, why not try and do it? Where then a few years you'd be in a position to sell high. I wish I had the cash reserves and the investors to sign up to investments in the space that I thought were incredibly compelling at the time. But, I'm still involved in that industry and still see a lot of upside and actively working with entrepreneurs in that space to help, build strategic partnerships and bring to market some of those solutions that we think could, radically improve the efficiency of this industry.
What are still some things on your bucket list that you want to do in life that you haven't gotten a chance to do yet?
One of the most significant things that you can do with your career after you've built, a lot of skills and a lot of experiences, and I'm sure some successes and some failures and whatnot. And I think one of the greatest things you could do with your career is to dedicate some time to public service. And public service at the governmental level is where you have the biggest impact because government, whether we like it or not, has a huge impact on, industrial policy, tax policy, corporate rights, private rights, public rights, and so on. And so what I would like to achieve in my lifetime, and the older I get, the more I realize life goes by pretty fast, is to work within public service in a public service capacity within government. I think, having studied international relations as one of my undergraduate degrees, ideally I would like to end up in the field of in some capacity of international affairs, international relations. So that's what's left in the bucket list, which I hope to achieve in my lifetime.
Amazing. Would that be like an elected office, or would that be kind of appointed, I don't know, ambassador, or how do you envision?
As many forms that it can take, everything from the Foreign Service Office at Department of State to an appointed position to an elected position. I think the current form of retail politics in the United States makes the electoral process very unappealing for me. But, I think a much easier pathway to at least feel like you're having some impact is through an appointed position. So that's certainly something that is possible. I think it's a function of who the kind of candidates you back, and what you can fundraise for them. I think that's the reality of it. But I think something that is has a lot of impact and is really skills based, merit based, is through kind of the State Department. So I think all of those options, the two latter options, are something that I would definitely consider.
Wow, that does sound exciting. I'm just kind of going through my head of like people that I know have done stuff like that. Actually, Joe Kennedy was in our class, and I saw him at the reunion. Got to talk to him a little. He was a congressman.
Yeah,
I think he's not doing that anymore. I wonder if he might be a useful connection. Or I heard I went to like Tim Draper's party actually just yesterday or day before yesterday, and he had a keynote speaker, and it was Keith Kroc, but he was CEO of DocuSign, but he got a government position, like appointed by Pence.
Yeah.
I guess he was having like a conversation with Pence, and Pence said, "Would you like to serve your country?" And he said, "Well, that's a dream I never knew I had." And he got into like the foreign, I don't know all the terms, but foreign service or foreign council, and
Sure.
yeah, somehow he's got knowledge of China and like what they're doing, and I don't.
Sure.
This is my knowledge domain here, but
I mean, it's exciting times to be living in, as always. Perhaps sometimes are more exciting than others, but I think from a geopolitical perspective, we are certainly in an inflection point where we're witnessing big changes to the systems that the world have been living under since the end of the Cold War. Those changes are happening very quickly, right? Who was it? Vladimir Lenin said, not that I'm a fan of his, but he said, there's decades where weeks happen and there's weeks where decades happen. And we're in an environment where a lot of change is happening in a short period of time.
Change of topic for a second. Stanford. You went to Stanford. Why Stanford? Like, what was the advantage that it gave you in PE and in life that like others don't see? And I think because I live near Stanford, I kind of get a sense of what it is because I go to the campus, I meet Greg there. There's a lot of events there. But like, what has it given you that you feel like others are not seeing, if that makes sense?
The background that I was coming from when I was applying to university, I was a first-time college, a graduate in my family. So neither of my parents had gone to university. So that was a very different environment than perhaps what you guys grew up in. And when I was applying to university, I wasn't sure that Stanford was the right place for me. I had visited some campuses in California, but I never had gone outside of California. So I didn't really know what universities outside of California were like. So I kind of applied blindly to other schools on the East Coast that I thought were fit. But when it came time to deciding, I really had a choice between one of the schools was Stanford. Another school was the Georgetown University, specifically the Georgetown School of Foreign Service. And another one was the West Point Military Academy. But this was a reflection of the environment that I grew in up in Southern California, where I grew up very close to two huge military bases. So for me, it was very normal to consider military service as a perfectly viable career path. I ended up choosing Stanford mainly because it was closer to home and closer to what I knew. So it was actually, ironically, like a decision that was based more on practicality reasons than, the belief that the university would open up, a myriad of opportunities. But once I got to Stanford, it was very clear that I was, at the big boys table, going to school, competing with, some of the brightest minds on the planet. And I had to bring my A game to be able to compete at that level. And then, being in Silicon Valley at the height of the first .com bubble was also a very unique position that, a small percentage of the world population had exposure to. So I think that those were meaningful, so very unique experiences that obviously I would have missed out on had I chose a different path, And I think it reinforces the point that, a few decisions that you make in life have such huge outsized impact on, the rest of your life. And this was one of them for me.
Are there a lot of people in, I guess, the private equity world that are from Stanford? Is it like created by Stanford alumni, or is it like super diverse?
No, I'd say, as with universities all around the world, the makeup of their alumni and the careers that the alumni take will be a reflection of the geography that they find themselves in. So I think, New York universities, perhaps University of Pennsylvania, with its proximity to Wall Street, are more finance heavy. Stanford definitely is not, though I think the percentage of graduates from Stanford that have entered finance is more a reflection of those that went into finance on a venture investing basis. And then, all the many funds that have blown up from that have been created as a result. I think most of Stanford's graduates have entered in technology companies in some form. But imagine all those graduates that went to Facebook or Google, of which there's many graduates that have gone to those companies. Some percentage of them then go out to start their own businesses. So just like in the Seattle area, we have, Amazon and Microsoft have resulted in, a creation of huge ecosystems there, technology. None of that would have been possible had Bill Gates not decided to move the company to Seattle. So I think the geography has the biggest impact on the industries that are represented among the graduates.
Could you share more about your childhood, being a first generation college graduate, and
Sure.
what were some of the enabling factors that your parents did to sort of support you on your educational goals?
Sure. So, okay, so childhood, I grew up in Oxnard, California, which is about an hour north on the seaside from Los Angeles. Most of the industry in Oxnard has historically been agriculture, remains the primary industry today. It's also a town where, Spanish is probably the most widely spoken language. And like much of the Southwest, the history of the Spanish speaking communities, whether that's Mexican or Spanish or Native American, goes back centuries. These communities were still part of, Spain longer than they've been part of the United States, though that inflection point will happen sometime in the next 30 years or so. So that's the environment that I grew up in, really different to other parts of the United States. But look, it's still state of California, largest population. LA is still the second largest city in the country. So there was enough proximity to be able to, take trips to LA and get exposure to everything from entertainment to Hollywood to, other industries. I think the influence of parents in life is always, very important. I was fortunate enough to grow up with two parents, and I think they were very supportive of our educational development. Even though they didn't go to university, they didn't know what that was like. They knew that university was something that was good, and what they always said to me was, if you have a degree, it's something that no one can ever take away from you. But a degree is what you make of it, right? I'm thankful that they were always pushing my brothers and I to pursue academic excellence. But when I did go to university, I quickly found out that university is not necessarily rewarding people on a merit basis exclusively, right? A lot of life and a lot of success in university is also about who you know. So one thing that I learned quickly is that you really have to network your way to get in front of key administrators at the university or professors, because they can end up being gatekeepers to great opportunities for you later in life. Once I figured that out, then I was able to get an excellent mentor, a professor in the Department of Political Science, and who served for many years as the director of the Freeman Spogli Institute of International Studies, Professor Chip Blacker. So these kinds of people can have a huge impact. Again, it's a lot about what you do with the relationships. These opportunities just don't come kind of granted to you. And hey, if you do the X, Y, and Z, the career path is just going to miraculously be a step ladder, very linear trajectory. It's really about what you do with these relationships in life.
How is your relationships with your brothers and your parents now? Do you keep in touch frequently?
Yeah. I think like with most millennials, people in our generation seem to be much more family oriented. We speak to our parents a lot more frequently than Generation Xers.
What was it like kind of growing up as a kid with your brothers? Would you be supportive or kind of competitive? What was it like?
So I think most childhood relationships are going to have elements of both, but I think I was very fortunate enough to grow up in an environment where I think the three of us were all very supportive of one another. Because we had no sisters, there was certainly something missing there that we had to learn later in life. But I was very lucky to grow up with two brothers that were all really bright, have pursued great career, attending great universities, pursued great careers on their own, and have, had impacted their own industry. So I have an older brother who's an architect, designed and helped build some really iconic buildings in Los Angeles and now in the Bay Area, and a younger brother who dedicated his career to screenwriting and film directing.
And they stayed in the Los Angeles area, I imagine.
Brother did, because when you're in that industry, you want to be in LA. And older brother decided to, he was more passionate about the Bay Area, so he moved there.
And then how about your parents? Like what are they doing now?
So I'm very fortunate enough to still have both parents. They still live in Oxnard. They have downsized to a slightly smaller home and live, I think, a more relaxing lifestyle near the beach. So very happy for them and try to spend as much time as I can with them. Fortunately, they're still in very good health. And now I think the priority is in trying to bring grandkids to them so that they can, enjoy grandkids more.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Still on the list.
Yeah.
Has your brothers had any like children yet, or?
So my younger brother has his first daughter, and I have three kids on my own.
So you already have three kids. I'm
Yes,
sorry.
I do. Yeah.
How do you manage? How do you manage that? Like, I know.
I don't, I don't mind it. It kind of happens one day to the next, and it's a miracle that it does.
Got it. Got it.
No, I exaggerate. Yeah. So I think it's a lot of work. So I'm the kind of where I really try to take a very active role um, when kids are with me. So all of my attention of going to them, right? And so my whole schedule, my social life, everything revolves around their activity. So, but don't get me wrong, I still try to do the stuff that I enjoy and force them to enjoy those things as well. So if there's certain like museum that I like to go to or whatever, I'll drag them there if I have to. But I'm pretty lucky where I think two out of the three so far have demonstrated that they are kind of aligned to the stuff that I like.
Where do you see the future of tech and private equity? Is private equity going to change? Is tech going to change? There's all this stuff happening with AI. Like, what do you see, like, our future? You're seeing things from a really unique perspective, just like understanding the PE side of things. Like, what do you think it's going to look like in 10 years, like the world? It's a very broad question.
Yeah, no, the kind of stuff that I really enjoy. So I know that AI and other technologies are the flavor of the day. And perhaps last year or 2 years ago would have been like crypto technologies and blockchain technologies and so on. And I get it. There is always the flavor of the day. I try to think more broadly, and I think that the biggest impact on technology was the Inflation Reduction Act. And this is probably going to sound like totally from left field for you guys, but I think the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, will have such a huge impact on technology policy at the national level and globally that's what's going to ultimately have the biggest impact for the technology industry and for investors in technology. Okay, now again, I'm not a core technology investor. That's not my profile. I don't profess to be an expert in this space. I've done some investments, some work in technology enabled services, but core technology is not what I do. Having said that, I try to be as educated as possible of what's going on around the world. And I think the Inflation Reduction Act is the biggest change in industrial policy the United States has embarked on, arguably since the Second World War, but okay, probably since the end of the end of the Cold War. And so this act of legislature will have huge impact on the incentives that are created for technology companies to build microchips in the United States, to build renewable technologies in the United States, to make the United States a very appealing destination for technology investors and technology companies. And so 10 years from now, I think we're going to find the United States highly competitive, very focused on outcompeting China, South Korea, and so on in the technology space across every aspect of the value chain. And the fact that we have a huge capital market, we have a huge and growing population, we remain in a very attractive destination for employees and employers, creates the right ingredients to make the US the country of the 21st century, even though we were also the country of the 20th century. So I think that's the position that we find ourselves in over the next decade. And if you adhere to that belief, then you should be very excited to be based in the United States and to be working and networking your way across a variety of industries, whether that's tech or elsewhere here over the rest of this decade.
What are some examples of advice or wisdom you got from mentors at Stanford that had a profound impact on your worldview, mindset, or life goals? Perhaps Chip Blacker or maybe another professor.
Different professors obviously give different advice. My mentor, Chip Blacker, is someone that really emphasized public service. And because he was also coming from a position where he served in academia for most of his career, but he also served in the White House. That was very important advice because that's what's really motivating much of my desire to be able to serve in a similar capacity later in life. Another professor said to me, look, he used this analogy about boxing, and he said, Jesse, everybody always remembers the last 30 seconds of a boxing match. Well, I think what he meant there was, it's really important, no matter how you start your career, no matter how you start a job, and everyone always talks about the first 90 days, and I get it. Like those first impressions are critical, but how you leave a job, how you leave a post is also critically important because that's the last and lasting impression people have about you. And I get it. There's many books written about the first 90 days and how critical that is. Okay, I get that. But how you exit is just as important, if not more important, I would argue. And again, I like to take slightly contrarian views on some of these, right? Something a little bit more nuanced than what you might hear from everybody else. And so I think that's important advice that I would give to others, which is, don't forget about the importance of public service and consider the impact that public service, government has on everything from industrial policy, which I was referring to geopolitics. How you exit roles, jobs, positions, and so on is really just as important as how, if not more important than how you enter them. So that's the two bits of advice I would give.
And on a practical level, like if someone wanted to get into public service, what would you say is a good entry point? Is it trying to be an intern at the Senate or work at a local mayor's office, or what do you think is most valuable?
Wrong person to ask because I would still arguably find myself in that position since I've never actually served in public, in a public service capacity. I haven't not worked in government. But I would imagine that surrounding yourself with the people that do have those that influence those decisions is the best way to get your foot in the door and to build an intelligent opinion of whether or not this is something that you want to pursue. My first job gave me a great deal of exposure to how bureaucratic Fortune 500 companies can be. Bureaucracies within government are, 10 times, 10x greater. And you have, millions of federal employees that all, enter service with very optimistic and very virtuous goals and end up, having very little impact on how things play out, right? Because no matter what you do, you could be working your whole career towards a specific agenda, but an administration changes and then all of a sudden there's a complete, change of priority. So I think the best way to get exposure is to just surround yourself with people that already work in an industry, try to get in front of, congressmen, women, and senators who have a great deal of impact.
Well, thank you, Jesse. So much fun doing this interview with you and find out how your life has been going since graduation. Appreciate you being here.